So here are some last minute tips for your test today. Okay, so I'm going to read and then I'll talk a little bit about them. When adding or subtracting fractions, you must find a common denominator first. My suggestion is to find the common multiples for each number so it minimizes the chances that you will have to simplify or reduce in the end. What happens is that some of you choose to multiply the two denominators and use it as your common denominator, and it's fine, but it can be a number much larger than if you just list the common multiples like we do, for example, between 3 and 8. You list the multiples for 3, you list the multiples of 8, and find the least common multiple. That way you will have a better chance that you may not have to simplify or reduce your fraction in the end. Okay? When adding mixed numbers, for example, if it's a whole number and a fraction plus another fraction, or a whole number and a fraction plus a whole number and a fraction, again, you're adding. You need to find their common denominator first. Then change your numerators the way we have been doing, and then go ahead and add it the same way you would add fractions and your whole numbers. Now, just remember that when you add fractions, sometimes you may end with a fraction greater than 1. For example, let's say you added 3/4 plus 2/4, and you got 5/4 as your answer, and your whole numbers were like 2. So you have 2 and 5/4. Well, 5/4 is greater than 1. So chances are you may not see that if it's like multiple choices. If it is not multiple choice, you leave that there. I may give it as credit to you, okay? But on the FSA, chances are that it's not going to happen. So the 5/4 is greater than 1. That means you can take those 4/4 out of it, which is 1, add to your 2. So now you have 3 wholes, and then you have only 1/4 left. So instead of 2 and 5/4, it changes to 3 and 1/4 because you took 4/4, which was 1 whole, and add it to your whole numbers. Okay. When subtracting mixed numbers, stack those numbers together. In fact, when you add the mixed numbers, stack them to fraction under fraction, whole numbers and whole numbers. When you subtract, do the same thing. Stack the numbers. Okay. So you have your fractions, take away fractions, and whole, take away whole. What happens is sometimes, so you're going to have to find the common denominator again, because you can't subtract if they don't have the same common denominator. But chances are sometimes you're going to end up having, let's say, 2/4, and you have to take away 3/4. Well, 2/4 is not enough to take away 3/4. So you have to borrow, like we would always borrow 1 from the neighbor. And you do borrow that 1. However, when that 1 comes to the side of the fractions, you have to write that 1 as a fraction so you can add it to what you had before. So if you had 2/4 and you borrow 1, you're going to add that 1 and you're going to write it as a fraction. You would write 4/4 because we are talking about fourths there. So that would be easier for you because you don't have to change your denominator. So you had 2/4, you borrowed 1, and you wrote it as 4/4. Well, right now you have 6/4. Then you can take away those 3/4. Okay? So don't remember, every time you borrow when you're subtracting fraction, that borrowing, that 1 you borrow has to be written as a fraction that represents 1. It could be 4/4, 3/3, 2/2, 5/5, 6/6, 8/8. But you look at what you have. If I am talking about fourth, you write 4/4. If it's fifth, you write 5/5. If it's eighth, you write 8/8. Okay. And at the bottom here, you have a little tip that says when the words match in the problem, chances are you're doing a subtraction here. We did that a lot on Friday. Okay, for example, I have 2.5 gallons of milk. I drank 1 1/4 gallons of milk. How much is left? Not only am I talking about gallons, I have 2.5 gallons and I drank 1 1/4 gallons. I'm also asking how much is left. So chances are you're going to subtract those numbers. Also, questions that ask how much taller, how much more, how much shorter or longer are examples of subtraction questions. Okay, usually subtraction questions. There's some tips here for you. Okay. Now, multiplication. When multiplying a whole number by a fraction, multiply the whole number by the numerator and keep the same denominator. Sorry, took a break here. Remember, multiplying a whole number by a fraction means repeated addition. So if I have like 2 times 3/4, it's the same thing as 3/4 plus 3/4. If I say 5 times 3/8 is 3/8 plus 3/8 plus 3/8 plus 3/8 plus 3/8, 5 times. But if it is a small number like that, you can go ahead and write it as repeated addition and solve it. The denominator stays the same because if we are repeating 3/8 5 times, my answer is still going to be an eighth. But how do we do this? We multiply the whole number by the numerator and then keep that denominator. So 5 times 3/8. Well, 5 times 3 is 15, and it's 15/8. If I had added 3/8 5 times, it would be 3/8 plus 3/8 plus 3/8 plus 3/8 plus 3/8. I would have 15/8. Okay? When multiplying a fraction by a fraction, you multiply numerator times numerator and denominator times denominator. This is the easiest one. Okay, numerator times numerator, or bottom times top times top, bottom times bottom. Numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. When multiplying a mixed number by a fraction, okay, a mixed number is when I have, for example, 2.5 times 2. There are two things you can do. Now, if it's a small number, let's say 2.5 times 2. Well, we talked about it, right? That 2, I can say that 2.5 is being repeated 2 times. So I can do 2.5 plus 2.5. And you know how to add those now. Or if it's a bigger number, what you can do, you can change the 2.5 into a fraction greater than 1. And we talked about it. If it's 2.5, well, change the 2 wholes into halves. Well, 2 wholes is 2 halves and 2 halves. That is 2 wholes. 2 halves and 2 halves equals 4 halves plus the 1 half you had, that equals 5 halves. And then you can multiply by the other fraction, and you know how to multiply fractions. Okay, if you do get an answer that is greater than 1, then you can go back and find a mixed number by dividing. Now, if you don't want to, you can also multiply. Like I said, it's just if you're doing 2.5 times 2, that 2 has to be multiplied by both numbers on the other side. So 2 has to be multiplied by 2, and 2 has to be multiplied by half. You can't just, some of you are multiplying 2 times 2, which is 4, and you write the half on the side. No, you have to multiply the half by the 2 as well. Scaling. Scaling is when you multiply by 1 or a fraction that represents 1. So let's say I have 5/8 times 1. Well, your answer is going to be 5/8 because anything multiplied by 1 gives me the same answer. So whatever I have times 1 is going to give me that number I had to begin with. Okay, so it doesn't matter what number, as long as I'm multiplying by 1, it gives me the same answer. I just told you Friday to be careful because they may write 5/8 times 4/4. Well, 4/4 is 1. So your answer is still 5/8. So just put a little 1 around that 4/4. So you know you're multiplying by 1 and you get the same answer. Well, and that is just my reference for you. If you're multiplying by a fraction that equals 1, your answer is going to be the same. Well, if you're multiplying the 5/8 by a mixed number or a fraction greater than 1, your answer is going to be greater than it was before, greater than 5/8. If you're multiplying 5/8 by a fraction that is less than 1, for example, 5/8 times 3/4. 3/4 is less than 1. Your answer is going to be less than 5/8. Now, for that type of question, I think there's only one on the test, and you don't have to solve. You just need to know, what am I multiplying that number by? If I multiply by 1, it's going to be the same answer. If I multiply by a mixed number, even if it's like 1.5, that is already greater than 1. Your answer is going to be greater than it was before. Okay, and if it's by less than 1, your answer is going to be less than you started with. Multiplication in word problems, because this is the problem when it comes to word problems, is understanding what they're asking us to do. So some ideas I can give you. If they're asking you to find the area of a room, the area of a shape, area is multiplication. Multiply the length times the width. The thing is, it may be a mixed number times a whole number. It may be a fraction times a fraction. Then you just have to know how to multiply those. But area is multiplication. Questions like this, number of questions or students, for example, and I have two examples here. 2/5 of the 25 questions were right. So let's say someone took a test and got 2/5 of the 25 questions right. Well, 2/5, the child did not get all the questions right, because otherwise it would be 5/5 of the 25 questions. Well, what is 2/5 of those questions? Well, that would be multiplication. So it would be 2/5 times 25. Okay, in this case, you would multiply 2 times 25 because it's the 2/5 repeated 25 times, right? So 2 times 25 equals 50. You'd be 55th. Don't leave your answer as 55th because we want the number of questions. What is 55th? Well, divide 50 by 5 because that is a fraction greater than 1. 50 divided by 5 equals 10. So that means 2/5 of the questions that he got right were actually 10 questions right. Okay, so he probably failed that test. 3/4 of the 16 students were boys. So there are 16 students, 3/4 are boys. Well, not all of them are boys. 3/4, almost all of them are boys though. So that gives you a little tip too, as like if there are multiple choices for you to look at. How would you solve for this? 3/4 of 16 is 3/4 times 16. You would have to multiply the 3 times 16. And then because we are talking about the number of students, I don't want the answer as a fraction. Divide that because you're going to find a fraction that is greater than 1. Divide that, and 3 times 16 is actually 48. 48 divided by 4 is 12. So 12 students, see, it's very close to 16, were boys. Okay. Recipe problems, if they have problems using recipes, they usually say, I need half of something. It's usually multiplication. And another tip here, if the words don't match, that's why we talked about subtraction, they usually match the gallon with the gallon, or the miles with miles, or yards with yards, whatever that is. Okay, now if they do not match, then it's multiplication. For example, I have 7/8 gallons of, or a gallon of milk. I use half of it. I don't say half gallon. If I had said half gallon, I used half gallon because the words would match, I would subtract. But here is half of it. It's half of the total there. It's not just half gallon. So, and usually pay attention to the question, how much did I use? So you would not subtract because they're not asking how much is left. They're asking how much did I actually use? Well, it says I used half, but it's half of the 7/8 gallons. So you are going to multiply. Okay. Dividing. When dividing fractions, you must ask yourself what is being shared. So you write it in the correct order. So if you know what you're sharing, because many times we talked about 5 kids share 2 candy bars. Well, you wrote it as a fraction. You wrote 5 divided by 2, but they were sharing the candy bar. So it should be 2 divided by 5. Right away, they would not get a whole bar because 2 divided by 5 is not enough to give everybody a bar, right? So they would get less than a bar there. They would get a fraction of a chocolate bar. So you write the 2 divided by 5 as a fraction, which would be 2/5, 2/5. And that's your answer. Okay? So pictures for this type of question always help you visualize what you're doing. But if you notice, the question is asking you to divide. If it says cutting, splitting, sharing, dividing, you are going to divide. Write it as division, but do not forget to ask yourself, what are they sharing? Because they will flip flop those in the words, in the word problems. So then you get confused. Okay. And remember, if they are talking about 5 students, you're not splitting the students, you're splitting whatever they are sharing. Okay. So always ask, what are they sharing? And be careful with questions that say Mark shared candies. I don't know. I'm not talking about numbers here, but Mark shared some candies with his 3 friends. Well, usually it includes Mark as well. Pay attention to those questions. Don't forget the person. Like, I shared candy with my 3 friends. Well, include yourself there. Okay. Um, when dividing, if you have a whole number by a whole number, for example, 37 divided by 5. Let's say I have 37 pounds of dirt that 5 kids had to move from one place to the other. Each student or each friend moved the same amount. Okay, so you're dividing those 37 pounds of dirt by the 5 kids, so it's 37 divided by 5. Well, you are going to divide it as usual, and you're going to get a remainder. Remember how to rewrite, use the whole number. The remainder is part of the fraction. So 3 wholes, and here I don't remember, I'm not solving it now, but you would write it, you would get as an answer 37 divided by 5, write it as a fraction, 37 over 5, and then you can divide to find the mixed number, okay, using the whole and the remainder and what you're dividing by. If it's a whole divided by a fraction, if you know you're dividing, you're splitting, you're cutting something that is whole by a fraction, your answer will be a whole number. Draw to help. Questions are usually about pizzas, pies, and cupcakes being split. For example, so in the question usually says how many pieces, how many slices. So we have had several examples, like I had 8 pizzas for the party, and those 8 pizzas, they're a whole number. There's a whole number. Those 8 pizzas were cut into eighths. How many slices did I have? Draw the 8 pizzas, cut them into eighths, and then how many, and pay attention to the question. How many slices? Don't write it as a fraction. Just count the slices. If it's 8 pizzas and you cut them into eighths, well, you have 64 slices. If you have cupcakes and you cut them in half, okay, each cupcake gives you 2 pieces, right? If you cut in half. But if you have 3 cupcakes, well, cut 3 cupcakes divided by half, or you cut in half, you're dividing, you're going to have 6 pieces now. Okay. And when do you know you're dividing the fraction by the whole? The opposite. Well, if it's a fraction by a whole, your answer will be a fraction. The part with the question mark, when you read the question, it has the question mark, usually says what fraction. So if it says that, your answer is going to be a fraction. And again, you have to ask yourself. If they talk about a ribbon, and a ribbon is 1/4 of a yard, and they use that to make 3 dolls. I think that's something we talked about. Okay, you get that 1/4 that you have and cut that into 3 pieces. Now remember, I would draw a picture of the whole yard and cut it to fourths. And then I would use only that fourth I have. I would cut it to 3 pieces, but then you do the same thing for the rest. And that would be 1/12. But as long as you know what you're dividing, if you know you're splitting that 1/4 of a ribbon or 1/4 of a yard into 3 pieces. So it's 1/4 divided by 3. And it starts with a fraction, ends with a fraction, okay, which would be 1/12. Okay. When it comes to volume, that was our last topic. So it should be a little bit fresh in your head. Use the formula length times width times height. They give you those 3. They give you the length. I like to look at the front of the shape, the side for the width, and the height is how tall that shape is. Now sometimes you look for the length and you don't see a number there unless they give you the cubes. You count the cubes, the just the bottom layer. But sometimes if it's a rectangle and you don't see a number for the length, look at the opposite sides. Remember, in a rectangle, opposites are equal measurements. So this side equals this. So if you don't have a number here, look at this, the opposite. Do we have a number that you can use? The same thing. If they give you a number at the top and the bottom doesn't have, those two should be the same. Okay. Uh, Sometimes they may give it to you like the area of the base. If the area of the base is given to you, that means they already solved the length times the width, because that's how we solve for area, length times width. So if they give area of base in the word problem to you, or even in the picture that you see area of base, that means the length and the width is already done for you. All you have to do is multiply that by the height. Okay, and then you would have your answer. If you have to type in the answer, I would try for volume. Remember to type in cubic, because it's a cube, right? It's a 3D shape. So volume, we would answer with cubic. So if it's 2 inches by 4 inches by 3 inches, so it's 2 times 4, which is 8 times 3 is 24 cubic inches. Now, I will not deduct points from you for that, but we just need to get used to writing those. Okay. All right. So I hope this helps you a little bit, refresh your memory. Okay. And you're going to do great. Just read carefully. Try to draw as much as you can to help you. Okay. So see you in a bit.